Anyways, I'm bringing that up because when Donald Harris wrote in his piece about his grandma, allegedly Miss Chrissy Brown, her adoration for Alexander Bustamante and his politics, I knew something was very wrong there. When I began to look into Kamala's mother, who we're going to discuss on Monday with a journalist who knows a lot about that family, and realized that she too came from a wealthy family of communists, I realized that something was very, very wrong there, extraordinarily wrong there. So Kamala's family, as we have determined, on her father's side, so we know she's 50% Indian, right? We got that on the genealogy chart. Okay, she's 50% Indian. But on her father's side, we know that it's comprised of Harrises and Browns, and that they were the slavers in St. Anne. The Harris family, by the way, we have learned was formerly the Solomon family, bore the Solomon surname when they were in England before they settled in Jamaica. It was, as we spoke about in the last couple of episodes, a Sephardic Jewish family that settled, enslaved, and then when there was no more slavery, they ran the sugar plantations. Slavery got abolished, and they still were the masters of plantations, but with different political concerns, because now all of a sudden policy matters, okay? It matters a lot if you're going to want to re-enslave these people. So I got quite obsessed in the last 48 hours with trying to locate and learn more about this Christiana Brown. First and foremost, because I just don't feel like this is her. And despite everything that Donald tells us about her and her politics and how involved she was and how she was running these dry goods stores in his piece, I can only locate a Christiana Brown who was a laundress at some point, like a person who was washing clothes. That was her responsibility. And she appeared in a court hearing that had to deal with election fraud. So that was a major red flag for me. So I start crawling through more and more articles, still can't find anything on her. So I decided to instead renew my focus on her alleged husband, okay, Joseph Alexander Brown. He looks like a fine gentleman, well dressed up in that photo, okay? And I just wanted to learn as much as I could about this individual because I realized that it would paint a broader picture for me about this family, which I am now recognizing was extraordinarily powerful, perhaps all throughout time, by the way. Like, I think these families kind of reappear in new countries, know how to implement systems, get with the times, they're way advanced. They know how to put themselves on the right boards of governance and make sure that they are informing policy. So I stumbled upon a hit. And by the way, we can get that chart up just so we can show who Joseph Alexander is so that you guys are following this. So you have Oscar Joseph, right? So you have Donald Harris there at the bottom. That's Kamala's dad. Then you have Oscar Joseph. And we are told that Oscar Joseph's parents are Joseph Alexander, the Syrian Jew landowner. We know these as a fact. And that he allegedly married Miss Chrissy Brown. So she should be Chrissy Brown Harris. I can't find anything on this woman. And I'm feeling that might not be a picture of her. I don't know if these two look like they're exactly a match to me, but perhaps they are. Anyways, so I'm looking for Joseph Alexander Harris, and I do get a hit about a Joseph Harris, and it was a wedding piece. And I'm going to show you that pertaining to a woman named Adele Harris. And this is in the Kingston Gleaner, and it informs us that at the Sacred Heart Trinidad, Port of Spain on the 20th of September. And by the way, this is in 1906 by the Reverend Father Casey George Gonsalves of the West Indian Telegraph Company, got married to Adele Matilda, the granddaughter of the late Joseph Harris of Brownstown, St. Anne. Okay. So for clarity, Adele would have been the cousin to the patriarch Joseph Alexander. Again, showing you this on the chart because you're seeing, I'm going to tell you why this woman became of interest to me. I don't have a picture of her. And just showing you like that just would have been the cousin of Joseph Alexander. So this became of interest to me because of something else that I found out about her and her family. And I'm going to go back and tell you, my husband always leaves like books on the bedside that he wants me to read. And a while ago, like kind of actually when we first got married, my husband made me read this book, which was entitled The World for Sale. It was sort of like an early baptism for me into the world of commodities. It was a very interesting read, really just to understand that our viewpoints are so molecular when we are reading the news and trying to digest world events. Really, everything revolves around commodities. Like what what is for sale in the world? Okay, is it human? Is it human cattle? Okay, then everything that's happening, you get war, politics, policy is all going to be based on that. And they kind of shut the rest of the world out. Like, so you don't realize that they're really going to war because they want oil, right? They're telling you it's really because there's a terrorist here or there's a terrorist there. You don't realize people are really going to war because they found gold. But you're hearing like it's, I don't know, maybe they wanted to expand into a different territory. Everything you learn in school is just a nice little fairy tale, that's really just designed to make you feel and think that there was like this human emotion behind all of these wars that are happening and things that are happening, when reality, it just comes down to commodities and what is for sale and who can make money and how. So you have to imagine during this period in Kamala's life, right? Her family was at the top, as far as we can go back, they were at the tippity top of the agricultural revolution, followed by the first industrial revolution. Like, they owned slaves, right? So they were extraordinarily wealthy, like I said, and you're not just going to let that wealth go. You're not going to be like, okay, well, now they abolished slavery, so I'm good with that. So we know what followed the first industrial revolution was the second industrial revolution. So if you were a slave owner and you are looking to make sure that you maintain your wealth and your influence, what is the next industry that you're going to get into during this timeline? The answer to that is oil. Oil kind of became the next big thing to get into. And so I couldn't find anything about Adele, but then I did learn that this family, for whatever reason, decided to become Catholic. Maybe they were compelled by faith, but we had discussed that even on the Bravo Harris side, that suddenly everyone kind of converted into various Christian denominations, this one being Catholic, and they got into the oil industry. And I found this because Adele had a child. She had two children, and one of them had a very thorough obituary written about him on an ancestry site, and that person was George. Again, I can show you this chart. Here he is. This is in memoriam. It says Vin. He went by Vin, but his name was George Vincent Gonsalves. Okay, so despite the fact that he was an English Jew, they converted to Catholicism, and now they've kind of got this Spanish last name. Okay, look at this obituary. And I'm going to tell you why this matters to me. This is our dad, Vin Gonsalves, was born on the 13th of July, 1914 in the Great House at Marble Hill near St. John's, Antigua. He was the third child and the second son of planter George Reginald Reggie Gonsalves and Adele Matilda Harris, the first to be born in Antigua. His elder siblings were both born in Jamaica, as was his mother. So every side of the family, they were involved in commodities. Dad attended Antigua Grammar School until he was 10, when dark clouds changed the family life drastically. Our grandfather sold one commodity, cane sugar, as we know. They were all running sugar plantations in Kamala's family. And he dealt with Red Path Sugar Company in Montreal. By the way, I think that's going to be a clue. I tend on exploring that over the weekend. He had a sister, Sarah Mildred, in Montreal. Her husband, Reggie's brother-in-law, Antonio Rodriguez, appears to have handled some of his business there. In the early 1920s, cane sugar became a depressed commodity. Beet sugar was produced cheaper than cane sugar could be. Cane sugar production was very labor-intensive. The two family estates ran up huge debts. Then disaster happened. Reggie died. Our grandmother had no business experience, and with the help of her brother-in-law, had to liquidate the estates for little or nothing in return. Adele decided to move to Trinidad with her 5 children. Life was not easy for them. I don't believe that. But they were able to survive on little. The depression started early for them. By 1931, the eldest of my father's siblings, Mary Louise, married a wealthy Venezuelan and went to live in Caracas. Okay, that is of tremendous interest to me. So instantly I said, okay, oil. That's very interesting. And I can't find this Mary Louise. I did find her birth certificate. She was actually born Maria Louise. Here it is right here. She was born, Marie Louise, and the last name is Gonsalves. She was born in Jamaica. All of that checks out. And then she virtually disappears. And were it not for this obituary, you would not be able to attach her to her brother or her parents because they have wiped any trace of her being attached to her parents on all of the ancestral sites. Like when you look him up, it doesn't say that he has a sister anywhere. But fortunately, we found this obituary, which was really done by the other side of his family. Anyways, the second portion is interesting too. So the sister is married into oil in Venezuela. And let's see what he did. Vin worked with Esso, an American oil company, in the accounting department and rose to the position of comptroller of accounts for the Caribbean area. His employment took him, Madge, and their 3 children to reside in Santo Domingo, Cuba, and Miami, where he finally retired to reside with his wife and family. This, apart from an initial spell of duty in Trinidad, Vin was highly regarded by his employers, who depended on his utter reliability, okay? All of his employees, and business acquaintances and friends regarded him with respect and endearment. So he had employees, he's working for an American oil company. This guy's high up. Now, this last piece gets super interesting. On his last foreign assignment as chief accountant for Esso in Havana, Cuba, Vin, Madge, and their 3 children were among the huge crowd to welcome and congratulate their new leader, the victorious Fidel Castro, when he arrived in the Havana waterfront on the famous boat Granma. Meticulous Vin, who kept detailed records of certain events, also had a comprehensive library of home movies, which included 16mm movie recording of that memorable occasion, which clearly shows George, Virginia, Douglas, and of course, Fidel Castro. I saw this movie at their Miami home. However, it was soon afterwards that Mr. Castro declared his real intentions of transforming Cuba into a communist state. Oh, I'm sure that they were so surprised by this. Panic set in. All who could left hurriedly for Miami. Vin sent his family, excepting George, to Miami to await his arrival. George offered to stay with his dad, which was very good. But this is called love. Noble Vincent gallantly decided to remain in Cuba to try to complete his job. As the chief of Esso's office, you see, Castro had ordered his army to confiscate all American and foreign property, but why make the transition easy? After shipping the most vital information and files to Miami, it was decided to destroy all the remaining records. This is what Vin did. All the Cubans got was confettis and shreddies. Vin and George had to run for their lives and caught one of the last flights from Havana to Miami. This was the kind of stuff which Vin was made. So I call bullshit on those last 2 sentences. It's just a thing that everybody does. After they work with communist governments and they're corrupt, they then try to tell their families like stories, like, or they try to sell to the public, like, no, we worked with Fidel Castro and there's like, yeah, there's evidence that we stayed there and like he was starving his people and we were working on behalf of oil companies, but we were lucky. We made the very last flight out and all was good. Like just happened to be like wherever we go, there's just communism in our family, but like it's not us. We fortunately escaped with our lives. No, I smell a family when I was reading this and realizing that now it looks like I'm going to be able to find Kamala's family with new Spanish names in Venezuela. Don't know if you've checked into Venezuela lately, but that also got robbed by communism due to people that, I would say probably had an interest in their oil, a lot of oil. It should really be the richest country in the world, but it's not because of communism. And so I just don't like that everywhere this Harris family goes, communism accidentally follows, okay? So I am looking for this Marie Louise who married a wealthy Venezuelan. I also strangely found the last name Castro as I was trying to search through some records. And I think this is actually really important. And even though we're talking about who would be Kamala's cousins, I do also know, and this kind of made me think of the Rothschilds story of like the banking dynasty where he sent his sons to different corners of the world to start banks. And I'm thinking like this is sort of looking a lot like maybe family members got sent to different corners and got involved in politics, but we are dealing with a family that has always had a lot of power through every century, and it concerns me. Okay, when we start running up and dealing with oil and we start hitting up against Fidel Castro and we're talking about slavery and we're talking about a woman, maybe that's why she dropped the Latina accent. Maybe she's like her auntie and she was just like, oh, sorry, I forgot I was not in Venezuela. But like we're dealing with a family that seems to morph according to whatever they feel they need to sell themselves as to gain power. I again want to state that Kamala and her family are incredibly dangerous people. This woman did not grow up middle class. She grew up, her mother's family was extraordinarily wealthy, and her father's family was extraordinarily wealthy. And it was confirmed to me by her own relatives that her father was handed a business in Jamaica. This is not your middle class person doesn't just like wake up and go, oh, okay, you descend from unbelievably wealthy slavers and plantation owners and sugar plantation supervisors and Standard Oil people. And like, yeah, sure, like there's some video footage of you and Fidel Castro, but you girl, you're in these streets. You are from these streets. I cannot impress enough that Kamala Harris is potentially an incredibly dangerous person. I know that we are already in the middle of people voting, but as much as you can work to get this information out there, I am telling you, there's something dark. And I think, and when I say something dark, I don't mean a black person. There's not a black person miles and miles within this family. I can't find one black person. But I'm thinking that the melanin, if my guess is correct, is going to come from an Indian that may be in her family, because we know that Indians were involved in the sugar trade. From every indication that I have, this family settled from Jamaica from the UK, and I think that they were involved in the East India Company. So like I said, a family that constantly morphs but maintains their power according to the times and with the power behind them of the mainstream media. So I want to take a pause on that, and we will, of course, have so many things